Hello dear crypto friends, and welcome to this video in which we are going to try to find out if this was already the bottom for this Bitcoin dump or if it will go lower. Let us look at some data and try to estimate what likely is going to happen. So here's the weekly chart, and we see there was a good reaction at the weekly moving average 200. We are currently sitting right on it. It went below, but we are bouncing up again. That is not a bad sign already, but of course it is too early to rejoice, because if we now go into the daily chart, we see that the back reaction is not yet something to behold. It's not super impressive yet. And if we go into the 4-hour chart, we see that the bounce is not super impressive yet. If we activate the volume, we can see that the selling volume is a lot higher than the buying volume. So ideally, we would like to have green bars that are higher than the red bars. That would be a strong sign for reversal, and we cannot see that yet, right? So it's a bit too early to rejoice. But of course, if during the course of the day now there come a few nice green 4-hour candles with a lot of buying volume, we can get a bit more optimistic. Now, going back into the weekly and reactivating our moving averages, we see that the volume is already not so bad, because today is only Tuesday, yet the volume of this weekly candle is already higher than some volumes here for entire weeks in this range here. So it is looking pretty good. If the volume would continue to be like this, we could say that most likely the weekly volume close will be around, well, this area, which would bring us really to volumes that we have last seen in the March 2020 low. So this would be a pretty strong indicator that the bottom was in this week. And I also think that either this week or next week we will reach the bottom, even if we should drop lower, because you can see that the weekly RSI for Bitcoin is really making new historical lows. We really zoom out to the entire Bitcoin chart from the very beginnings, and we see that the lowest weekly RSIs we ever had was here in January 2015 and in December 2018. And we zoom in, and then we see that we are actually lower right now. Believe it or not, the weekly RSI at 27.6, where we are sitting right now, is the lowest it has ever been in Bitcoin's entire recorded history. Believe it or not, this is absolutely crazy. So the weekly RSI would be in favor of that this has already been the bottom, because if we should drop lower, the weekly RSI would get even lower, which would get into ridiculously oversold territory. But the RSI, of course, doesn't give us a guarantee. And the weekly volume, of course, is looking good, but it is too early to tell right now if it really already is a reversal. So going back to the 4-hour chart, we really want to see the buying volume pick up. And if we want to get a nice bounce, we need the next 4-hour candles to have more buying volume than selling volume. That will be pretty important to confirm that this is a solid bounce. But of course, what will this depend upon? Well, friends, this of course will depend on this guy here, the dollar index. And the dollar index really has made new highs. It has surpassed the last high of 105. And if we zoom out, what does that mean in turn? Well, friends, that means that the dollar index is seeing highs that it hasn't seen since 2002. So we are seeing values here that the dollar index has not seen in 20 years. And if I just look at this chart here without any indicators, we can see that the next big resistance will be at this point here, right? This peak here from September 2002 at 109.8. We can see that this here will be the next big resistance. But of course, we do not know if the dollar will really go so high. But if the dollar was to continue pumping and really go to 109.8, it is pretty likely that Bitcoin will still go lower. That is clear, right? So we see that the dollar is currently in a bearish divergence. So we are making new highs here. We are making new highs the dollar index is breaking above this peak, yet the RSI is a lot lower. So if we are lucky, the dollar index will see a strong bearish divergence. But that of course doesn't mean that it can still pump for a few weeks to 109. That of course doesn't exclude this possibility. And if we pump to 109.8, we are pretty likely to go down with Bitcoin quite a lot more. And should that happen, friends, I think it is pretty likely that we visit the area which I yesterday said was my most likely target area, which is the weekly moving average of 290 weeks, which was hit perfectly in March 2020 and which would have been hit perfectly in August 2015 if the weekly moving average 290 would have existed back then. So this is like the super ultra support for Bitcoin in my opinion. And if the dollar index would continue pumping now to 109.8, which unfortunately is absolutely in the cards, the dollar index is on a rampage right now. That unfortunately could mean that we are really visiting the weekly moving average 290. And as I said yesterday, the likely target area for me is somewhere in this range here, right? From 20,000 to 13 or 15,000. It could go out of these bounds here. We said that a target price of 13,000 is in the most extreme case possible. It is not something which is completely unrealistic. Of course, for me, the most likely value is at the moving average 290 at 17,000. But of course, plus minus a few thousand, we know Bitcoin can do things that are more crazy that we would have anticipated. So in order to find out if this will really happen, we must look for clues in the dollar index. And if we go into the dollar index daily chart, we can see that there's also a bearish divergence forming. So we have higher peaks here, right? We have higher highs in the price, but we have lower peaks in the RSI. So that is a bearish divergence which is forming. So it is looking as if the dollar was going down, but we should not believe the bearish divergences too much because they can be in play a lot longer. It can just continue going up, and all the time it is forming a bearish divergence, and only after it has pumped to 109.8 to this strong resistance line, only afterwards does it start dumping. That could absolutely happen. And currently the most bearish sign is that the 2-year yields have broken this super ultra long-term resistance line that has been in play in the 2-year government bond yields since the 80s. We see that was a super insane resistance line which has now been broken through for really the first time in over 30 years. That is a pretty brutal sign, friends, I have to be honest. And if they don't roll over soon, if they continue pumping, then the dollar will also continue pumping, and then that doesn't look good for Bitcoin. However, we have a small glimmer of hope here, as they are also printing a bearish divergence in the weekly. We have higher highs here in the weekly candles, we have lower highs in the RSI. So there is a bit of hope that the 2-year yields will roll over. The picture is, by the way, similar also for the 5 and 10-year yields. We don't have to look at them separately, but they show a similar picture. So there is a bit of hope that they will start to roll over soon-ish. And then, of course, if that happens, the dollar index will also start dumping, and then Bitcoin will finally recover. But unfortunately, it is too early to tell, because here also bearish divergences could be in play for a long time. It could make a long time a bearish divergence, and all the while the yields just creep up higher and higher. That is unfortunately possible, and that would mean the dollar continues pumping and Bitcoin continues dumping. So it is unfortunately, I would say, too early, friends, to rejoice. So there are some signs that this could have been the bottom, for example the weekly RSI, but the continued strength of the dollar index, the continued strength of the government bond yields, and the not super strong bounce in the 4-hour chart, the not really super impressive buying volume yet, makes me believe that this has not been it. I'm currently inclined to believe that this has not been the bottom and that we will go lower, but this is just a hunch. You cannot say it for sure yet. On the other hand, we have the weekly volume, which already looks pretty good. So If we are lucky, this could have been it. But as I said, it is quite likely that we are going to visit lower prices, and still for me the most likely area remains the weekly moving average 290 at 17,000. But in a most extreme case, as I said yesterday, we could go to this lower band here. That is always the ultra support for Bitcoin, and it is standing right now at 15,000. Okay, 15,000, and it is not so unrealistic to think that if we are already at 15,000, we could even wick down to 13 or 14,000. That is the most extreme low for me. So I still remain of the opinion that we will close somewhere in this area here, right? Between 20,000 and 13,500, somewhere in that area. We have already closed at 20,800. That was the current low. So 20,000 is not far away anymore. And if we are at 20,000, 17,000 is also not far away. So it is too soon to rejoice. We still have to wait and see what will happen the next days with the dollar index and how the buying volume will unfold. And of course, I will track this all the time and will make daily videos so that we can find out if the bottom is already in. All the while, of course, I'm buying cheap coins. That is clear. This is a wonderful buying opportunity that only happens once every 4 years on average. That's clear. But that is not financial advice, friends. Do your own research. I will never tell you what you should do. I am just buying coins right now. That is clear. Bitcoin and different altcoins, because such opportunities really don't come often. If you found this video interesting and helpful, please like and subscribe. I would be super happy if you would subscribe to this channel. I will make, as I said, daily updates on the Bitcoin market, cryptos in general, on the correlation to the stock market, dollar index, government bond yields, and so on and so forth, so that we can understand what Bitcoin is going to do. Have a nice day, friends, and see you in the next update video tomorrow. Bye!